fucking do it. Welcome to the fucking Weeb Crew Podcast. I'm your host and fucking Mumi.
Hey.
And we're joined today by Study of Swords.
Hey, how's it going?
I don't know. This is the hentai episode. There's no way to get around it. We're talking about hentai.
Dive right in.
We were supposed to make a pun based on his name.
Let's put very phallic name.
That's right.
Well, he's been studying the blade, but today we're studying a very different kind of sword.
Your dogs really do not like you today.
I don't like them ever.
Anyone thinks it's going to be like the goddamn trash taste episode where we just talk about bullshit? No. This is going to probably be, well, hopefully more interesting. Because, Richard, you came to me with this idea because we were talking about, well, it's like, yeah, you're welcome to come on at any time, but I don't know, what would you want to talk about? And you're like, yeah, I want to talk about hentai. And I kind of was like caught off guard. I was like,
yeah,
fucking all right. Yeah, sure. Cool. Let's do it. Yeah, I know I know the kind of like stuff you're into, and I don't mean that in a degenerate sense. But I figured it'd make for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's like, like my one of my guiding principles of being online is, never be horny on main. So I can understand why it would be kind of a shock to be like, this is the guy that wants to talk about animated pornography. Really?
Interesting. Wow. What a shock. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself for people who may not be like familiar with you or your content.
Yeah. So I run, my name is, again, Richard. I run the YouTube channel Study of Swords. It's a sort of general media. It's mostly Japanese visual media, critically examining it and looking at kind of exploring different elements of it through, different lenses, let's say.
Different lenses, there's some like psychoanalytic stuff, some
psychoanalytic,
feminist analysis in there,
critical theory, Marxist analysis, that kind of stuff. So
absolutely. So for those who thought, let that automatically like set the tone for what we're going to be talking about with this episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, the goal is to make this the driest hentai episode ever.
Yeah, there's no lubrication here.
We're going to sap the fun out of it. All right, I want and let that mental image sink in your head. That is,
if you're horny at the end of this episode, you're a different kind of level of deranged.
You're a real freak.
So, before I started on the YouTube channel, where I was my primarily facing in terms of interacting with the anime community or fandom was through panels. So the last couple of years, I've been one of the people running some of the After Dark content at Anime North in Toronto, and so that sort of necessitated it was sort of like, well, we're looking for people to look into the content, and I had happened to have passing interest in it, so I'm like, okay, I can start exploring this a little bit more in depth. So picked up a couple of the books that are out on the that are available that talk about, of course, they're academic text, right? And just kind of built off from there, and then ended up where I am kind of now, which is where it's an actual like active topic of research, because I just find it really, really interesting. And it's also something I can't really talk about on the YouTube for obvious reasons.
Yeah. I don't know what the fuck is going to happen with this. I mean, we're not showing anything, and we're just talking about. I don't even know if we're going to describe much explicitly. So I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, that would be fine. But like because I don't have the budget for a camera. All my content obviously is like voiceover. So it'd be kind of weird to try to do like a hentai.
What kind of footage are you going to use to talk about it? Well,
you can use this, static, poorly edited images. That's what people want. That's what people go to YouTube for, right?
That's exactly back in 2011. So then, what exactly about like edo anime and like edo manga like interest you, like specifically, like on like I guess like a quasi academic level? Like what do you find like interesting about it?
So what I kind of find interesting is effectively, for people who have watched my content, I like taking media seriously, even bad media. So I think
quote unquote bad
That's
media or absurd media.
So I think that media as it is, there's always going to be some interesting aspect of it. I think that's actually something a perspective Joe and I kind of share. And so the reason that I guess academically I'm interested in hentai or in the ero side of things is that it represents I'd say like a dark spot in fandom, especially or at the very least in fandom discourse, because like you don't really now again it might be just my limited experience, but you don't really see people really talking about it, and again because it's pornography, right? And pornography has always had this a pretty effective negative connotation, despite the fact that it's consumed by so many people. And so like when people are talking about hentai and they're kind of like no one takes it seriously. So as an example, after AN this year, so AN 2023, I was in the Anime North Discord, which they have, and people were kind of talking about things and like joking about hentai and going to the panel and like or not going to it and being like I saw that, but like it's just people showing up and making jokes and no one really takes it seriously. And I'm like, well, I do.
There's nothing wrong with making like jokes and having fun when talking about hentai, but that also shouldn't necessarily denigrate or crowd out more serious discussions of it, which is what this podcast episode is going to be about.
That's right.
Sorry.
and so that's kind of the interesting thing. So one of the one of the important hentai or ero scholars in Japan is Akira Nagayama, and they published the book Erotic Comics in Japan, and that's Galbraith actually was the editor and of the English version when it was released in North America.
Okay, this is not the one that was published by Faku. This is the other one.
Yeah, so that one's by Kimi Rido, which is the history of hentai manga. So the other, and I guess I would probably say Nagayama's text is probably slightly more academic than Rido's.
Okay.
Even though Rido is like it's actually, they're both really good texts. Like I would strongly advise if anyone is interested at all about the history. Now they're of course focused on the history of ero manga, but if people are interested in it, the history of hentai from Faku is fairly inexpensive, or the history of hentai manga, I should say.
It's not much. Yeah, I really like the cover of it.
Oh yeah, I looked up the artist who did. I actually have a copy right in front of me. I looked up the artist who drew it and some of their stuff, and it's like disturbing, but okay. Well, like, so one of the I guess doujinshi they ended up doing was like a take on Super Sentai, where like the Pink Ranger gets corrupted, but there's like this monster that ends up doing what hentai monsters do, except its semen ate her ova.
Interesting. Yeah. I'll look this up later.
Yeah, so it
just taking notes.
literally sticky notes, but so
sticky notes.
I can't believe that wasn't on purpose. So
goddamn.
What I'm getting at, circling back to the topic at hand. So in that text, Nagayama makes a really good point, which is that as it turns out, the only people who seem to take pornography seriously are the people who want to end it, the people who are its opponents and who want to destroy it because they see it as, it's a drain on society. It's
as like a threat or like an obscenity, some sort of moral degradation.
Yeah, it's a symptom of a sick society and sick world. And so the idea that people who want to take it kind of serious, the idea that people who kind of want to defend it, through things like freedom of expression, or the idea that there's value in people being able to explore the erotic in kind of a safe, controlled environment, should at the very least be taking it as seriously as the people who want it to end. And I think that was like kind of one of those light bulb on moments. It's like, yeah, that actually makes so much sense. And I love the quote that's in. So
yeah, I don't know if I can link to these books in the description, but I'm sure you can just type them in and find them.
Oh yeah, well, unfortunately, erotic comics in Japan is one of those cases I mentioned. I'm not sure if it'll be in the podcast, but in discussion earlier, reaching out to academics. And so I had
is it out of print?
No, it's incredibly expensive. It's like 160 US because it's an academic book.
Right. Yeah.
Now, so I had reached out to Patrick Galbraith to get for a PDF of an article he had written that was related to, I guess, the topic, because it was actually published in one of the journals of pornography studies. But he was kind enough to also and by the way, here's a copy of Nagayama's text because it's related to what you had, your inquiry was about. And I'm like, that's awesome. It's like, I already had it, of course, but it's still kind of nice.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Patrick Galbraith is the GOAT.
Cool guy, Patrick Galbraith.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Should have him on at some point. So yeah, I guess it's like kind of like, because I know you also, you've talked about Kill la Kill and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I feel like your approach is somewhat similar in that, you talk about, fan service and Kill la Kill. It is there for yucks, it is there to be funny, but there is also some like more interesting stuff going on underneath the hood that not a lot of people really examine because it is a very silly show.
That's right, and it's still like one of the most popular. As actually a perfect example, because if you go into somewhere like Mal and look at the reviews for a lot of the ero anime titles, you'll see that exactly that. No. I mean, there's literally a tag. I'm sure we can get the tags later. That's called just for the plot.
Is there? Oh my god.
Oh yeah. So there's this idea already in even ero or hentai fandom. I'm going to use those words interchangeably. That no one takes it seriously. It's simply a masturbatory aid, and that is the be all and end all of it. And so it's like, well, the animation's not great, the plot makes no sense, but the sequences were very erotic. So if you're looking to to masturbate to this, then you're probably good to go. 7 out of 10. And that's like just page after page after page of those reviews.
I mean, I'm not going to act like my anime list is like the peak of intellectual analysis when it comes to anime and manga, because it kind of just sounds like you just described a regular seasonal review as well.
Yeah, regular seasonal, right?
But I do think that is also just indicative of how people discuss. Like, there's this meme that goes around where it's like, I don't know, it's like fucking people like discussing some like who is best girl in some fucking anime or whatever the fuck, and they're like going at each other's throats, and then it's like discussing hentai, and they're all like sitting around like a table like gentlemen in suits, like it's like the UN or something.
Right? Yeah, that happens.
Yeah. But I don't. It's one of those things. Like, well, I guess people are kind of discuss it seriously, and I get for what it's worth, I've never seen a very heated discussion among fans of hentai regarding like the quality of something necessarily. Those sorts of discussions, at least more than like just regular anime, tend to be not as aggressive, at least from what I've seen. But they're also not really going that deep. They are kind of just, absorbing like, well, surface level, animation, what are like the poses, and just like how many girls are there, and what kind of content it is. What are the tags that it's filling out, which I think those things are important, but like you said, they're not the end all be all.
No, but this is again, for people who are looking to kind of approach it, scholastically, academically, like me as an example, hentai, or the way that hentai is consumed, is probably one of the clearest examples of Azuma's database consumption model. Purely even just like a tags, because people for the most part aren't really interested in I guess making a broad generalization about the average hentai consumer. Yeah, the way that they're going about the consumption of the media is effectively, at this point, primarily online, and so it's through the tag system, and all the H sites that are out there have very elaborate tagging systems, and that's effectively how people find things, and that's exactly how Azuma talks about how postmodern database consumption works. I mean, he was focused strictly on otaku, but that's actually another really interesting question. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of like otaku and anime and manga studies that you can kind of apply the theory that's being presented and seeing it work in real life. It's just that because the content is pornography or, the erotic, that it's not, that's sort of where it ends. It's not worth kind of looking at beyond that, but it kind of is. And like, there's other ways you can kind of approach it. So the other kind of interesting aspect that I think is I'm a big fan of semiotics, and I like a lot of the videos that I do produce and a lot of the content I make for panels explores, things like semiotic encoding and like media theory. And hentai is one of those mediums that really, really relies on that model because there's an entire image-based lexicon that you kind of need to understand to be able to interpret what's going on in a page and not just to see what's going on. Because you can, so as an example, one of the panels that I've done the last 2 years, when I'm talking about this specific element, I'll have like a manga panel up, and it'll have a sequence where you'll have like so it's a man and a woman. It'll have like the lady's face in the corner,
You're going to need to use your imagination for this, listener.
Yeah, so it'll have like the character's disembodied head in the corner of the panel, and then it'll have all the sound effects. And then it'll have like a still shot of a still image of the two characters in coitus, and then it'll have on another panel like the internal shot, like the internal imagery of what's going on in there.
The X-ray, right?
And so most people who are familiar with human anatomy and the way that these sorts of things work would be able to piece together what's going on. So where the interesting part happens is where that translates to something that is erotic and is going to trigger, an arousal response in the reader. So it's kind of interesting that hentai, still being, at least ero manga, is still using the same kind of, visual language that manga uses, but in very interesting ways. And that's kind of one of the really neat things about Kimi Rito's book, The History of Hentai Manga, is that instead of going in like a chronological sequence of the history of it, he actually explores different erotic expressions and how those have changed sort of through the publication history. So he talks about things like, the expression of breasts and how they kind of move from the early days of like gekiga or ero gekiga into like, rorikon, and then into like the contemporary kind of bishoujo sort of character designs, and how that kind of corresponded with other things that were going on in Japan at the time. There were like specific actresses in pornography that were becoming very popular. And so you almost see like a literal inflation of breasts, so to speak, over the course of time. And now it's become its own kind of very specific, like it's a tag, like, giant breasts is its own tag in. Right.
Of varying degrees, different magnitudes.
Yeah, exactly. And so like he looks at stuff like that, or he looks at things like sound effects. And the sound aspect I didn't really think too much about until I read another book, which I might want to talk about a bit later, by a gentleman named ℌệ𝔫𝔱ằ𝔦. He wrote a book called Comics and the Origin of Manga, a revisionist history of comics in Japan. It's a Comics and the Origins of Manga, a revisionist history by ℌʄ𝔫𝔫𝔸. And he explores, so currently the model for how sort of manga developed in Japan, I guess this is a little bit of a tangent, but I promise it's gonna make perhaps some sense.
I get. Well, it's kind of hard to disentangle this from manga, especially in like the early days. So go off, King.
So effectively, almost all the accounts of, I guess it maybe tightened a little bit. All the accounts of the history of hentai in Japan go back to inevitably Hokusai and Dream of the Fisherman's Wife / Girl Diver and Octopi.
The octopus thing, right?
Yeah. or other, woodblock ukiyo-e, sorry.
Really, it goes back to that. See, I always thought that was just like a commonly cited myth.
So things like shunga. So this is the very common. If you pick up a work on manga, it'll inevitably come up that this is sort of the origin. Now,
I mean, that's literally on Wikipedia.
Yeah. So, as you say, it is effectively a myth, right? That's one of the reasons that Exner's not writing about hentai in any capacity or ero manga in any capacity. But this ties back into a broader discussion of what Otsuka Eiji calls the Kigensetsu, or the Choju Giga origin theory. So the Choju Giga is a scroll which is called Emakimono, or picture scroll depicting frolicking animals that dates back to the 12th century. So if you pick up a text like, I think it was Richardson's 1,000 Years of Manga, or you read some of the earlier texts about comics in Japan, they'll inevitably go back to this kind of pedigree that manga, rather than being what it is actually this incredibly ancient, uniquely Japanese media form that goes back to the 12th century. They've been making manga since then. Now, most people who are honest with themselves would be like, well, no, but they'll go back to Hokusai because he published, his daily manga.
Right.
And
that's where the term comes from, isn't it?
Yeah. But again, this is one of those tricky things where just because a word is used, that you can trace the etymology of a term to this point, that isn't necessarily static, right? Like the meaning of words change, and how they're used in their context is really important.
Manga can literally just be considered just analogous more so to just cartoon rather than comic necessarily. Right.
So Exner published this text in 2021, and what he looks at is the historiography of a generally marginalized period in manga historiography in general, especially at least in English speaking, probably in Japanese language texts as well, of the influence of American comic strips in the 20s and the 30s, and how where he puts the dividing line is he uses a term called audiovisual comic strips. And what he means by that is that something like a picture scroll, or things like Hokusai's manga, if there is text, if people in what's going on are speaking, it's always outside the panel. It's never internal to the panel. And there's some sort of debate about some things about like sounds, and he goes into this, and it's a bit beyond the ken of, I guess, this specific topic. But where he sort of draws the line as to where the major influence for contemporary manga come from was at this period. And this is where Japanese mangaka in the 20s and 30s began adapting this audiovisual comic with including word balloons and sound effects in the panels themselves. And he actually has this really interesting example of it. So again, it is a really interesting text, and if people who are interested in, the history of manga, very accessible. You don't have to be like, deeply into historiography or any kind of history theory. It's pretty plainly written.
But how expensive is it?
It's pretty cheap.
Okay.
It's public facing. Let's see. It is it's $34.95 Canadian.
All right.
According to the University of British Columbia's website. So yeah, it's widely available.
Okay.
But yeah, so what all this has to do with is, as it turns out, the history of ero manga is also significantly more recent, and the reason that people want to try to trace a genealogy back to a figure like Hokusai is again because of the content. Well, if it's just smut, if it's just pornography, then that's not really something you can be proud of in terms of a cultural product. But if you can spin it so that the origin of tentacles in ero anime or in ero manga is, one of the most famous Japanese artists of the 19th century, then suddenly that adds this veneer of cultural significance. And this is something that the state is very happy to promote because, manga is profitable, as it turns out.
Yes.
So this is actually something that's kind of interesting in terms of the way that people talk about it, is that even in Japan, this again, like the idea that manga is this relatively ancient and pedigreed media form is still popular enough that someone like Otsuka Eiji, came up with a specific name for the theory. Some of the people who have written about how that's not the case are people who are writing about ero manga. So both Nagayama as well as Rito talk about this. So Rito talks about the origins of tentacles and that expression in ero manga, and that actually gets traced back to Toshio Maeda, and Yorotsuki Kudoji. And when he was like interviewed about it, he's like, well, because everyone's like, well, obviously tentacles are the Hokusai, like that's where the media form comes from. And it's kind of like, well, then why aren't there really any tentacles in ero anime until Maeda's writing? It seems like why did everyone else ignore it? And then Kimi
suddenly just appears again in the record.
And then Rito has an interview with Maeda in the text, and he was like, I had never actually seen the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife, and that was because I was a child. So like my parents weren't like banging down the door to bring me to look at this work of pornography. And so his explanation is he only saw it kind of after he had already started, publishing doji and creating these works. Mm-hmm. And the reason that Maeda went with tentacles wasn't because, Hokusai did it. It was because it, one, got around censorship laws, and that's one of the main reasons I've heard. Yeah, and the history of ero manga and ero anime is a history of censorship. And that's a really interesting part of that as it happens.
I'm sure we'll get into that when we start discussing things being brought outside of Japan as well.
That's right, because there's again some really interesting things going on. But aside from getting past censors, because a tentacle is not a penis. Or it's not, the glands when they start editing things down to a certain extent with censorship. It also allowed for really fantastic, in terms of like pure fantasy as opposed to like really good options for expression. So Maeda says that he liked the idea of tentacles specifically because he could then pose the characters, and again, almost at least in his writing, it's almost essentially just female characters. He could put them in all kinds of positions that were, especially erotic, that wouldn't normally be possible. And since you're writing in a medium that is fantasy, you might as well try to make the most use of it as you can. And so it basically just expanded what could be displayed, what could be represented in the medium. And then it kind of just, it blew up, kind of, expanded out from there, so to speak. So I guess it's just one of the things you kind of come to appreciate is that the history of ero manga, or I guess the ero works or hentai, is the history of the anime and media forms themselves. Of course, you can also talk about games, but that's one of the kind of, in terms of like ero manga, ero anime, and ero gay. Ero gay is probably is absolutely my weakest point because I haven't explored too much into it. I've done a little bit of stuff, so like
it's like such a massive thing onto itself. That's a whole other podcast episode, really.
Yeah.
You want to come on and talk to us about eroge, and you happen to know quite a bit about it, leave a comment.
I don't know anything about eroge.
Well, I mean, I know a bit.
Again, just as like eroge is the origin of the visual novel. That's where it started. The first visual novels were eroge, and then they were popular enough that specific eroge titles were popular enough that major game companies that weren't operating on like the PC-98 or the PC-88. I'm not sure the PC-88 is a thing, but whatever the PC platform was, we're like, we could port this to the PlayStation and just remove all the pornography, the 12 images, the 12 pornographic images, and then sell this.
The 12 minutes.
Yeah, and they did very well. And it spawned this, very influential media form, again, because of pornography. So it's there, and it's always under the surface. And again, why I think it's interesting and kind of worth talking about.
So then where does like hentai start when it comes to like, we can obviously like start pointing to like the 80s specifically, unless you want to start looking at like Yasuji no Panorama or 1001 Nights, like Tezuka stuff. But
so are you talking about like Ero Anime?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
well, I mean, we can start with manga because that definitely goes back even further.
Yeah, and they're like everything else. The media forms of manga and anime are very much related, interrelated.
Of
right?
course,
but,
yeah.
Well, see, the thing with the history of Ero manga is that it's pretty well attested to. Like again, I have 2 books on it, right? That are widely available. Well, one's widely available, one's incredibly expensive, but. So I guess I'll go. We'll perhaps just run with the Ero anime. So the first Ero anime that's widely accepted to be the first one that was produced. Yeah. So things like 1001 Nights are mentioned, and Cleopatra is the other one.
Cleopatra, Belladonna of Sadness.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Yasuji no Panorama. I don't think anyone's fucking seen it. Very few people have heard of it. I don't think it's subtitled, but it's a thing that exists.
So things like
but things like that are different. That's like that's almost like a 60s 70s free love.
Yeah, and they're not like they're not, I guess, explicitly depicting the sex acts. If I understand it correctly, it's really more just like there's erotic and there's eroticism, but it's it's more ecchi, so to speak, than it would necessarily be like
well, sometimes it's almost just played off as a gag in a lot of ways.
Well, and that's sort of like the early history of hentai. There is actually a lot of the gag going on even in anime, but the earliest kind of agreed upon Ero anime title is called Lolita Series 1 or Wonder Kids.
Right.
It's released in that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, was that Azuma?
No. So actually, no, I can't say for certain. I'm not entirely sure if I guess because it's not super well documented, mostly because in a lot of countries it's actually illegal to have a copy of it because it does violate several laws.
Of course.
But so it's released in 1983. So it's
okay, and
it comes out of the Lemon People magazine. Right. Which is also like one of the first. Lemon People is like the first actual Lolita. The first Lororicon magazine. Manga Buriko came out to it was a contemporary, but didn't last quite as long. So you had the release of Lolita Anime 1, which isn't to be confused with another one, which is also called Lolita Anime.
That's another, that's the confusing thing. There are two.
There's 2 of them, and they're released very close to one another.
Anime.
Yeah, so the difference is usually it's the Wonder Magazine series or the Wonder Kids, the Wonder series.
Right.
And so after that, the next kind of important text is a series called Cream Lemon.
Yes.
This is something that Galbraith has written on. This is actually the article that I had requested to get a copy of it from him because I don't have institutional access to access academic journals. And so Cream Lemon ran from 1984 to 1987. At least the first series did, the first installment. It would have subsequent series running from between 1987 and then the last one was in 2006. And while it was also had eroticon elements in it, it was billed itself as sort of like the first bishoujo, erotic bishoujo series. And so like the eroticon bishoujo split is one of those kind of important points in both the history of Ero manga, especially because the bishoujo style would come to become the dominant expression of manga and anime in general.
Right. Yeah.
But Cream Lemon's really interesting because aside from it having a lot of videos produced, it also is the origin of a lot of expressions that would become, copied and repeated as, as the iterability goes in terms of the reproduction of the Ero anime form. So it would set up a lot of the conventions. I mean, of course, a lot of these conventions were already established in, Ero manga because it had been in publication for, almost a decade beforehand. Right. But in terms of, it was just quite impactful in terms of the influence it would have on later people who developed it. And that's again one of the kind of interesting things about the production of ero anime is that a lot of the people who end up making it end up going on to do other things in the industry in general.
Probably the most famous example would be Akiyuki Shimbo, who kind of like started in just normal TV anime and then went into hentai and then went back into anime.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at some of my notes from my so one of the areas I'm kind of weaker in terms of this kind of stuff is I am terrible with people's names and especially things like directors. As an example, so there was a title that came out in 1986 called The Legend of Leon Flare or Reion Densensu Flare. And the director of it was Uchida Yorihisa. And he would go on to do something like, become like an episode director or an animation director on things like Char's Counterattack or A Battler Dunbine. And he'd work on some of the Mobile Suit Gundam movies as well. I know the first instance of someone who I knew had sort of got their start as an Ero Dojin producer. And I've forgotten his name, which is terrible. The mangaka of Hellsing. Probably look it up, but
I'll look it up real quick.
Jamie, look it up.
But yeah, so like he got his start doing, Hellsing effectively started as a erotic doujin.
Kota Hirano.
Yeah, Hirano. So Hirano started life, so to speak, in publishing, and Hellsing specifically started as an ero doujin, and then just again adapted it, took out some of the made the eroticism a bit more coded as opposed to overt, and then we ran with it, and then had pretty successful career. So again, it's just, and I don't think it's necessarily right to look at it like some kind of like seedy underbelly, because I think that's perhaps a bit overblown, but just the interplay between these erotic expressions and the production of manga and anime in general, and the sort of cycle between the two is just kind of really interesting.
They exist in much closer proximity than I think a lot of people are aware of or comfortable with, at least speaking about like outside of Japan.
Yeah, and I think it's probably, now again, I'll be perfectly honest, I know very little about the production of 3D. No, sometimes 3D can be confusing, like real life pornography, so to speak, like actors and actresses kind of thing. So I don't think there's the same kind of, I don't think there's the same kind of overlap between people who are producing, pornography who then go on to direct, like a lot of television or a lot of,
there are probably some examples, but from what I understand, the world of pornography is a much more insular world. Yeah,
especially when compared to like the production of TV anime and again, because you're sharing a lot of the same resources, it's not quite as what's the term, ghettoized, balkanized maybe is a bit better. There's a lot more overlap between, because people are sharing resources and artists and stuff. So there's
more cross pollination, I guess, is what we could say.
So with these early video, or I guess these end of video, effectively, this is well before things like Laserdisc or other media forms kind of came on the market. You can still see a lot of the even more what would become, I guess, like hardcore or problematic. Problematic is probably the wrong word, because we're talking about pornography here. So people are like, of course, it's problematic. Even in these early texts, like something like Lolita 1. Lolita Series 1, you still see things like sadomasochism, bondage, again, like tentacles showing up.
These weren't necessarily vanilla works.
By no means. And so this is, I guess, from a...
It's pretty vanilla.
Well, now, but by today's standards.
I mean, if they're not being decapitated, I'm not for it.
Some of them, I think there's probably some cases of that. Like, I think.
Oh no, there's plenty of it. Aeroguro is quite a large facet of.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of interesting, because when you start talking about things like the nomenclature, or the way that terminology works, like the origin of the term hentai, at least as used in North America, is again interesting, because it isn't.
No, it's not really a word they use in Japan.
No.
At least in this way.
Yeah. So, in Japan, the terminology that's used, we've been using, is ero, right? So a portmanteau, like a localization of
Erotic.
English, though some people will contend that it was in fact a French loanword, not an English loanword, and that's kind of up in the air. Most English language texts will say that it's English. I'm sure most French language texts will say that it's French. And then just adding it to the different things, ero manga, ero anime, and eroge. Whereas hentai in North America, or in the Anglosphere at least, and again, it's contested because there isn't a precise. There's not like people can look to like Lolita 1 and be Lolita Series 1 and be like, that's the first one. We know that there's nothing before this, at least that we have any kind of record of.
Right.
With the use of the term hentai, it's not so clear. There's not like there's not a specific point where someone can point to and be like, that this instance right here is the very first use of this term. I'm pretty sure the wiki page tries to do that, but even like Rito, for example, they're not entirely sure. The most commonly accepted origin story of the term is that North American or Anglo fan subbers heard people using the term hentai and interpreted it as a literal transliteration as pervert, and not metamorphosis, which is its own thing we can talk about. But it's generally thought to be a shortening of hentei sayoku. Hentei sayoku sha, which is an individual with perverted desires. So a fan subber kind of came across that term and was like, oh, well, this is what they call pornography, because they're talking about, perverted people. And so it just kind of stuck and then just disseminated as the consumption of hentai in the media form kind of promulgated through fan subbing communities, and then through official productions through companies like, Anime 18. Though one of the things I'd like to try to find out in my research that I haven't come across is like when they started using the term hentai as like a term for marketing, because in the first series that Central Park Media through its Anime 18 label released was of course Yorosuku Doji. And in the marketing, they don't use the term hentai. And I'm pretty sure for a lot of the earlier products they released in the early 90s, they don't use that term in any of that marketing. It's something that came on a little bit later. So, but again, that's something I'm looking into at the moment anyways.
So then would have been somewhere in between then, basically.
Yeah.
A little bit after.
Yeah. And so one of the interesting texts about that specific period that is now very difficult to get because it's no longer in print, and even the authors don't really have copies of it, and it was kind of smutty enough that no research library or public library would probably have a copy of it, is a book put out by Helen McCarthy and Jonathan Clements called The Erotic Anime Movie Guide.
Okay.
And it was published. Hold on, looking at my copy now. It was published in 1998.
Oh, you have a copy?
Yes. So, and again, shouts out to Lev at 4P because he was instrumental in me getting this. Because when I looked it up to see if I could find a copy through Amazon, the copy they had listed was selling for around $13,000.
Does that make any sense?
$1,300. $13,000.
Yeah, $1,300, which is insane.
Still insane, right? But then it was like, that's through Amazon Canada. What if I look through Amazon the US? And it's like, oh, there's one copy that they're selling for like $13. So he's like, well, I'll help you out. So I ended up through a bit of a circuitous process getting a copy of it, which is great. And the reason that it's not getting published anymore is that I don't know. I think the publisher's still around, but it's Overlooks. They're still around, but it's kind of been outmoded. Both Clements and McCarthy are like, well, the Anime Encyclopedia has superseded this specific text. But for a text of its time, it's really interesting. And of course, for anyone who's familiar with McCarthy or Clements' writing, there's some of the earlier people who are like treating anime and manga as anime at least, as a kind of a serious academic endeavor. And it's not without issue. But they were also kind of like, well, why write about pornography? And the films they include in here, they have lots of non-hentai, non-ero stuff in here at all. But they've also got a lot of ero stuff. And so they break things down in categories, and it's really interesting because, again, it's kind of like one of those snapshots. But they have the same kind of, in terms of like the etymology of the term hentai and where it comes from, the same kind of explanation. But they, of course, also do things like fall into the trap of like tracing it back to Hokusai. So this specific text kind of, again, because it's published in 98, it basically catalogs a lot of the earliest and kind of most well-known hentai of that period. And in the UK, so that's where McCarthy and Clements are operating out of, because they're from the UK. The Yorotsuku Doji was one of those things that kind of like scandalized the British press.
Yeah, there was a bit of a moral panic about it when it was first being brought over.
There was. And so one of the reasons they put this book out, and a lot of their, if you look at a lot of their text, the historic context they're writing in is in the maelstrom of this moral panic about these perverted Japanese cartoons that are just, destroying the minds of our youths.
It was coming close to being banned, wasn't it?
So, in terms of Yorotsuku Doji, it is, so there's a corporation, maybe a corporation, I'm not sure what there's kind of this board in the UK called the BBFC, and they basically get to determine what does get shown and not get shown. So when, I'm trying to remember, so it would have been Manga Entertainment, or the company that would eventually become Manga Entertainment UK, was trying to localize and release Yorotsuku Doji. They ran into this problem about what could they have and what they could show, what they would not show. So Yorotsuku Doji, I guess, take us back for a sec, was originally released as a multi-part OVA series. So the first three were compiled, I think it was the first three. So the first three are compiled into a film called Yorotsuku Doji Legend of the Overfiend. And this is the one that, for example, again, interesting bit of history, and I'm sorry for jumping around, is actually shown at TIFF during the Midnight Madness.
Really?
Yeah, during the Midnight. So TIFF at the time had this programming block called Midnight Madness. And so hentai is introduced to North America, to the English-speaking world, at TIFF in 1989.
That's insane. 1989.
Yeah.
Okay. Would this be the first example then? I mean, again, obviously,
so
they tried to bring fucking 1001 Nights over, but it flopped and it doesn't count.
So that release, so it wasn't the dub because Central Park Media or Anime 18 wouldn't do the dub until 1990. They produced it in 92, released it in 93. But so that was a subtitled version of it. And as far as I know, it was an unedited version. It was literally just the Japanese film that was shown with subtitles. But that what they showed was this cobbled together film, because the original anime is produced in 1986. The original OVAs. So when they were trying to localize it in the UK, they had to cut, like, I think at the end, cutting like 90 minutes of mostly erotic content. And like of the like panel of people who were assembled to judge whether this should be published or not, there was like two people were like, yeah, we think that we can release it as it is, uncensored, uncut. This is fine. Yada, yada, yada. There was one person who was like, no, we should not release this at all. It's like releasing it it's kind of perfectly disgusting. So releasing a cut version of it would be even worse for some reason. So like they were like, just don't do it at all. And then the other panelists basically came to the consensus that they can release it in a modified form. So
Yorotsuku
Doji ends up getting released in the UK, and it causes this massive moral panic, and it's picked up by the British press, and there's all kinds of incredibly racist and orientalizing takes on it. This is also, of course, in the context of this is in the 90s. So it's also in the context of this creeping fear of the Japanese economy. This is, of course, before the bubble economy burst. This is during the Japanese economic miracle. So this kind of like latent fear of an ascendant Japan was definitely in the zeitgeist at the time. So that gets incorporated into a lot of the articles and writing that get written
that's
up
really
about
interesting. Yeah, in terms of the economic situation, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of I guess my academic background is in history. I have a degree in history as it happens, and so like taking like a historiographic, trying to understand texts in their historic context is always really interesting, because there's always some other layer the kind of atmosphere that texts get published in or things get released in. This is, again, multiple reasons why I find this interesting. And obviously there's enough academics writing about it that also kind of find it interesting, which is neat.
So how familiar are you with like Western kind of adult animation?
I guess kind of, I could probably name some of the, like, you know, the bigger titles, definitely. Like, you know, texts, obviously, like Fritz the Cat, like the heavy metal film, the heavy metal, like Heavy Metal is a magazine, you know, the works of people like R. Crumb and like the alternative comics kind of scene. I have vague familiarity with that.
So in the context of like those, because obviously Fritz the Cat's like 1972, Heavy Metal's like 1981, like clearly there was like some kind of precedent for like adult, you know, not like adult animation in the sense of like just for adults, but like adult animation for like pornographic reasons. So it's not like Legend of the Overfiend 1989 was like, what's the context for it being introduced, for it having that moral panic, like even within the context of like Heavy Metal and like Fritz like existing already. Like,
well, I guess because I do apologize. I would have to look at it a bit more. So I guess I'm speculating at this point. But
you're good.
A text, so a film like Fritz the Cat, doesn't have the level of it has, you know, sexual content, but it's not anywhere kind of explicit. So I guess the other thing that's relevant is that at the time,
or it's meant to be tantalizing. It's not a pornographic film at the end of the day.
Well, it depends on who you ask.
I guess it does.
And to be perfectly honest, this is sort of this kind of debate about Yoroshiku Doji or Overfiend itself, is how pornographic is it? Is it better to understand it as pornographic? Is it better to understand it as, you know, ultra-violent sci-fi? So where the panic comes from is the melding of the erotic with the ultra-violent. I'm assuming, have you guys seen Yoroshiku Doji?
Nope.
No. Okay. So,
we talked about it with Johnny when he was on, and I was like, I'm gonna watch this. I need to watch it. Still haven't seen it.
I've seen some bad stuff. I don't think I've seen Overfiend. No.
I mean, again, comparatively, so one of the things you'll see in a lot of the earlier ero anime is that, you know, people talk about anime as being like one of the things that defines anime is, you know, limited animation. Even that's a very crude generalization, right?
Yeah.
Ero anime makes explicit, like very obvious use of a lot of stills or very, very muted, limited animation. So where a character, where one of the female characters is like the sort of the first sequence that involves tentacles that happens near the very beginning of the film, or the beginning of the OVA, is she's basically like there's the two characters and these are college age people. And in this case, they actually were college age. They weren't like aged up for the American release. Right. So that's a first. Not a first, but, you know, we were talking about Lolita and stuff beforehand.
Yeah.
So the sequence that happens is they're basically making out in, I think they're in a gym, like they're in a gym locker room, as you do. And then this other character is like, and they reveal themselves to be like a monster. And then they start effectively, you know, sexually assaulting or raping the female character. And she's kind of, again, lifted up in the air, and there's different kinds of angles. But it's kind of like she's lifted up in the air, but her body is very still. And the animation that's happening is basically the movement of the tentacles. And you'll you know, the cut will go to the tentacles kind of, you know, moving around. Now, keeping in mind that this is also the period where this kind of goes back to this idea of this issue of censorship. So these early anime are still heavily censored. Manga is also very heavily censored at this period as well. This has to go back with specific one. So in context, it might be too much of a tangent. Maybe we'll circle back to censorship. So in Japan, the release of the Overfiend, these erotic sequences are censored. When they were brought to North America, they weren't.
Oh.
So in some ways, the American version, because they don't have the same kind of restrictions in terms of the censoring of genitalia, are able to show a bit more. Now, again, to some extent, you're not really seeing a lot of actual genitalia. You're seeing things like tentacles and that kind of stuff. But
yeah.
So the censorship wasn't there in the manga and the Anime 18 release, because the way that it would effectively work is that the Japanese animation, the Japanese animators or the studios would release, they animate everything, and then they put the censoring in afterward, at least with things like Yorotsuku Doji. Mm-hmm. And so when a North American company or a distributor outside Japan would localize it, they would just be able to get the unedited masters. And this is the origin of why, there's a period, if you look in like H sites, where there's like, uncensored hentai, and it's like very clearly mm-hmm. uncensored, and it's not some of the uncensored, because as an example with Overfiend and some of the other early Anime 18 titles, it wasn't really meant to be uncensored because when they were producing it, they didn't think it would ever get a release, in Japan, they can't have
basically.
It. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So some of the animation is very crude in terms of like there's not really a lot of level of detail in terms of if you see like a penis or something. This is something
I think anyone who has looked at uncensored hentai has noticed.
Yeah. Now, when you get later on, that's not the case. They know that they'll be able to get uncensored versions of it because they'll be able to re-import it from outside of Japan, which is what ends up happening, right. And it creates this really interesting cycle, which is one of the reasons that led to the kind of collapse of the uncensored hentai market in North America. But I digress. So it was really this idea that there was this, explicit pornographic elements mixed with this ultraviolence. And yeah, so you have people who like turn into giant demons that are like the size of Godzilla. So if you read a lot of the literature that's written about, there's a ton of stuff. I don't think it would be completely accurate to say that Yorotsuku Doji is to hentai what like Akira is to anime in terms of its impact in North America.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But when you're going through the literature, it absolutely seems that way because everyone who was writing about hentai in the 90s was
this sort of
Yorotsuku Doji.
Moment.
Everything's around Yorotsuku Doji. So there's a text called
that's something interesting. We need that because Yorotsuku Doji Overfiend was being brought over officially, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm then wondering is if, what was happening with, earlier works potentially being brought over, being fan translated and shared around just through tape trading, unofficially, effectively.
Yeah. So this is again one of those.
This is where it gets hard to like track down in the fossil record.
That's right, because you have to find. So I've at this point I'm reaching out to people who were like at anime cons. Like earlier anime cons in like the 80s or late 90s when they started popping up throughout North America, and trying to get in touch with the people who are running like the hentai content, because that's the thing that you did it at anime conventions for a really long time was you'd sit in a room with other people and watch hentai together as part of like late night programming.
You keep your hands visible.
And hand checks were quite common.
It's watching porn with the bros.
I mean, that's something that still happens at a lot of anime cons.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So trying to reach out to the people who are running the programming is probably I think will be a good way to find that information out. I have to just like troll through Usenet and like look through forums. And it's as I said, this is an ongoing research project for myself, so I'm looking into. But I could not say off the top of my head like what the fan side of things we're looking at. I have at this point really focused more on the professional side, and that's why trying to get in touch with John Cirabella is so important. Because I've been trying to reach out to him because of the sort of the research project I'm working on, which is effectively I'm basically trying to develop a history of hentai in North America because it's not something that's been super well written on. And so Cirabella is, because the Position Media Blasters and Kitty Media is a significant part of that history. And so I've emailed him, I've DM'd him on Twitter, I've responded in Twitter threads like, hey, I'm doing this research project, I'd really like to reach out if you want to ask some questions. And it's weird because like other people who I've reached out to have been very receptive. and either would do it, via DM or, shoot me an email and some questions and I'll answer you back when I have the time, which is, fine. But like, so I follow like the Media Blasters account. I follow like this other sub Media Blasters account, like their tweets, respond to their tweets.
Really, it sounds like you're just cyber stalking him at this point.
That's right. I don't think you understand how important Kitty Media is in this puzzle, because I've got a source from Anime 18, and so from Central Park Media, who's talked about that early history, and that's where it starts. But Kitty is important because it basically starts from the early days up through until what happened with Faku and where they kind of are, where they're sitting now.
Right.
So even if like I've actually got I was able to reach out to one of the voice directors, casting directors for some of the products that Central Park Media Blasters are working on. And she was like, oh yeah, just shoot me an email. So I'm like, well, maybe this will be another way that I could get to, trying to get in touch with Mrs. Cirabella. So John Cirabella, if you end up watching this video, please hit up my DMs. It's at Study of Swords. Would love to talk to you.
This would be a good question to probe William Chow.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say is like the Akira, like if we take Legend of the Overfiend aside for a minute, like what would you say is like the big hentai work that kind of came out? Like I know La Blue Girl's kind of well-known one in that early 2000s period.
So the Blue Girl for me is actually one of those, like the Blue Girl for me is like Ranma 1/2. Like Blue Girl for me in hentai is like Ranma 1/2 with anime. It was like my introduction to the media form, because at the time in the late 90s, as Japanese animation, Japanimation as it was often marketed as, yes, was kind of starting to kick off. At least in the rental distribution markets, places like Blockbuster and other, in my area, we had a chain of video stores called Jumbo Video. Did they have that like that little like curtained off area in the back? Oh, it wasn't curtained off.
Oh, it wasn't even curtained off.
It was out in the open. And for people who might not be as familiar with things like La Blue Girl or wouldn't be familiar with the packaging. Really important. If they Google, La Blue Girl VHS covers, you'll see. And that was what was on display. And it says, absolutely not for children.
That's something you still see on a lot of Media Blasters releases.
Yeah. Well, that kind of became like that's like the one of those kind of immortal phrases, right? Absolutely not for children.
Absolutely. And you really need to emphasize that because it's animation. And at this time, people would still have been associating animation being children's content.
Well, that's just it, right?
So you need to stress that.
You either had video clerks who were, because again, if you look at the cover of La Blue Girl, they just have a little circle covering an area. Now, again, because of censorship in Japan, you don't actually see anything like penetration. It's just like the area is basically just kind of like blacked out on the front of the VHS cover, but it's incredibly explicit. It's a girl who's being lifted up, whose clothes have been torn apart with all these like tentacles writhing toward her, and she's like,
use your imagination, folks.
Yeah, or again, just look it up on Google. You'll find it very easily.
Look it up.
And they just put a little sticker over the area that's kind of blacked out and be like, oh yeah, this is fine. This is fine. Now we can have this on a video shelf, right? No worries. So it was either through derelict or people who just didn't care or knew what either didn't know what it was or didn't care, allowed me and my friends to rent it. And so,
oh my.
So and again, so the Blue Girl is quite formative for myself, and I still think it's good. It has, I think, an interesting story in terms of the general narrative of it. And interestingly enough, so one of the kind of interesting things about, I'm going to say interesting a lot, the early Anime 18 stuff is that the people who were producing it don't want to talk about it, didn't want to talk about it, and almost everyone who was involved used pseudonyms because they were embarrassed.
You mean on the
Right.
localization
Yeah.
side specifically?
on the localization side, yeah. So for the Anime 18 through Central Park Media, they don't want to use their names. They don't want to be associated with it. Even though Central Park Media went bankrupt years ago at this point, but the founder still, as I have been told, does not want to talk about hentai, which is like, damn, that's a shame. And again, this sort of stigma. So again, I apologize, a little bit of a tangent here, but like Patrick Galbraith, because he writes about this stuff, talks about. He didn't actually come up with the term. I can't remember who it was that did, but there's something called the erotic barrier. It might have been Otsuka Eiji, actually, but it's basically this idea that people don't want to talk about it. And so it gets in the way of being able to do things like define the history about it, this stuff, because people are embarrassed. They don't want to talk about it because, they're making these, raunchy, violent, pornographic things that people would like look at them. They wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't show it to their mom. So they're not going to want to put their name on it.
Right.
But getting back to your question, I don't know if they're, like I said, I think Yosuke Doji definitely fits that. I can think of kind of more flagship series in the early 2000s, like Bible Black as an example.
Right, yeah.
Bible Black.
Kind of comes up probably, or Legend of the Necronomicon.
What about Rape Man?
Again, Rape Man's one of those things where it's kind of like Rape Man, Bondage Queen Kate. These ones that have these kind of goofy titles. And still pretty explicit stuff.
Still pretty explicit. Did you know, by the way, there's like 9 live action Rape Man films? They're not, I don't know if they're like available online at all, but
Are they pornographic?
yeah, it's kind of insane.
That's interesting.
I don't know if they're pornographic or not. I haven't seen them.
Well, it's kind of interesting because there is actually,
And I don't know where I would find them.
Because there are like live action with Blue Girl. There's live action Blue Girl videos that were made that are very, very tokusatsu. And then now they have. I haven't actually watched any of them, but if you're on the hentai sites and the banner ads they have like a series called Hentied, where they just have women who are engaging with in coitus with, again, like either completely 3D animated things, but it's kind of like trying to take that to the extreme. And be more explicit than you would be with like the tokusatsu stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, not my bag, but it's there, and it's interesting.
It's interesting that it exists.
Well, I guess it's kind of interesting to go along with what you were saying with like the Blue Girl, and them being kind of like ashamed to like be associated with it and kind of avoid it. That's kind of still pervasive in the industry, like of localization specifically. Like even more modern, like recently, like you got like all the fucking like Yuaka or like Sexter Credit, like their dubs, being very kind of infamous for just kind of taking the piss out of the whole thing and just being like a comedy, almost like ghost stories. Where it's just like,
yeah. And again, this is one of the interesting cultural artifacts is that with a lot of these early Anime 18. Or I guess I shouldn't really say early, but the Anime 18 VHSs and then eventually DVDs that are put out, because it was pornography, they wanted to kind of have this at least some kind of veneer of respectability, and they also wanted to be able to skirt any potential censorship issues or potential lawsuits, because in this case, many of the characters are aged up. So there's always a disclaimer, anyone engaged in, sexual activity, is over the age of 18. They're absolutely not over the age of 18. Yeah. A lot of them are set in high school. But in order to add to this kind of kayfabe effectively, Anime 18 produced this little 3-minute long educational video about anime. And it's really cool because at the beginning of every one of the, at least a couple of the, like Overfiend, they had it, the Blue Girl, Twin Dolls, and some of their other series, they'd have this little video that would explain what anime is, why the characters have big eyes, why they have multicolored, why they have different colored hair, why they're walking around in sailor uniforms. Well, actually, there are colleges and trade schools where they still wear those uniforms. So really, these are absolutely over the age of 18 and not teenagers. Please believe us. Please don't sue us. And when I talk to the people who are involved with that, they're like, yeah, that was literally, it's kayfabe. It's all kayfabe. Everyone knows that these characters are not over the age of 18, at least. Now, again, in Yorosuke Doji, they were, but like the Blue Girl, they're supposed to be high school aged. But it still talks about things about like anime as, I guess, even though the people didn't want to be really involved with it, it was a paycheck. There's even though it was like kayfabe, it's still, I guess, this level. It took it seriously. Like there aren't goofy dubs, at least with the Anime 18 stuff. They did a pretty literal transliteration of the text that was of the Japanese. So they weren't doing ghost stories. They weren't doing some of these other dubs where they were. Now, again, some of these like La Blue Girl have these comedic elements to it, but there is also, there's action sequences, there's real danger, there is, graphic violence.
Right.
But but despite the fact that they were embarrassed and they didn't want to talk about it, they still treated it like a legitimate media property.
Some form of respect was given to it.
Yeah.
Now with like the modern, like the dubs, I guess were those just like DVD releases where like you could at least choose the Japanese? I would assume.
Yeah. In many cases, yeah. So like with a DVD, because they had the option of doing like the dual audio tracks, there are some versions where you are able to get there is a dub and there is a sub. And again, as North American anime consumers became more refined in their tastes, and sub versus dub is a thing, was a thing, and it's a meme.
It's been a thing for decades, and it will never go away.
It'll never go away. There are certainly versions of these texts that do have, if I'm not mistaken, have both English, were dubbed, and would have subtitles as well, especially during the kind of like the golden age is perhaps the wrong word to use, but during the height of release of physical media of hentai with companies like, towards the end of Central Park Media's existence, let's say, and especially with like Kitty Media. Or the Kitty Media label through Media Blasters.
Media Blasters, yeah.
They would have. Bear with me for a moment. Actually, let's have a look here.
Seeing recently, Media Blasters is working on the live action version of Doomed Megalopolis, which just looks fucking lovely.
Yeah. So as an example, right now the first volume 1 of Bible Black, which was originally released in 2002. Has both English and Japanese language options. So they'll have the dub, they'll have the sub.
So maybe you feel like you want to be like, give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's like a matter of like they wanted to provide a dub for like that preference, but like even though they were embarrassed about it, so maybe it was more like a focus on like we're doing distribution on the Japanese release with subtitles, and the dub's kind of there if you need it or want it, I guess.
Well, here's the thing, I guess, is that, as I said, I've spoken with people who worked at Central Park Media in that era and their opinions on it. I haven't had the opportunity to speak with John Cirabella, please reach out to me, about Media Blasters and the Kitty label and how they felt about it. And I kind of get the feeling, at least through the current content, the stuff that they're still putting out, the fact that that they continued to be like effectively one of the only producers of localized physical media for hentai for a significant period of time.
For anime specifically. Because there's stuff like Faku and J18 Publishing, which handle like the manga side of things, but no one's really doing physical releases of anime. Yeah.
And as I said, like there's a whole hentai. There's a whole reason why the like North American localization of anime kind of collapsed. And why it's now like incredibly niche. But with that said, Media Blasters is still promoting it and it's still producing it. So one of the people I have reached out to and have spoken with is like one of the casting directors who's currently working for Media Blasters. And so it's kind of like they kind of wear their hentai bona fides on their sleeve. They're not embarrassed, so to speak. Yeah. So I'm curious if there's perhaps was by that point when Media Blasters kind of started getting into it and they released the Kitty label, if there was less of this kind of stigma at least in terms of like the sort of like the company ethos. But again, it's ongoing. Research is ongoing, so to speak. So, yeah.
I guess kind of going back to a little bit to when you were talking about like the discussion of hentai or ero manga and ero anime or whatever not being really taken like seriously, because like I guess going into the psychology of it, because like I've been curious, right, where it's like you see a lot of like incest shit, like not specifically with hentai, but like in pornography in general, like hey step bro, like that kind of shit. And so I've been curious where it's like,
I'm stuck in this washing machine.
I'm stuck in this gachapon machine. So I've been curious, and I'm like, what? So what is? Oh my god, they have not been barking this whole time. And right when I start talking, I've been curious because like I was curious. So I was like, well, you have this featured a lot in pornography. So like, where does this kind of stem from? So I've looked it up, and like, you know, something like mother-son incest or whatever in erotic material. That's often kind of a symptom of like a lack of like a maternal figure in your life, and so like you don't know how to kind of bond with a woman in like a romantic sense as much as like you're more yearning for like the unconditional kind of love of like a woman, and so like it kind of manifests in that way where like there are people that are drawn toward like mother-son incest or something, and I'm, you know, it goes all through all the different kinds of different erotic fetishes and stuff like that. I don't know how much of that kind of transfers into like, I imagine a lot of it would transfer to like a within anime and like ero manga, stuff like that. But is there like any kind of like specific kind of study going into it as far as like, are you aware of any kind of specific kind of discussion or space for that as far as like within a ero manga sense?
Yeah. So there is, of course, the historic explanation, the going back into time immemorial, the specific aspect of Japan, Japanese culture, Nihonjino and that kind of stuff. So some people would say and point to a text like the Nihon Shoki, or no, Nihon Shiki. No, it's the Nihon Shoki, I think. And look at like the original tale of Izunama and Izu. Again, I'm terrible with names, but when you go back into like Japanese or Shinto mythology, and it's Izunami and Izunaga were the original like founding deities of Japan, were brother and sister, and so that's where incest starts. Right from the beginning of Japan conceiving of itself as a country.
They've been fucked up for centuries.
Yeah, going back to the literal Shinto deities who created the land of Japan. And that coupling, that is the origin, and that is the deep history of incest in Japan. And it's like, well, that's there, but like if you look at Greco-Roman stuff, Hellenic mythos, there's a lot of incest going on there too, and it's still, but it's not expressed in pornography the same way. So it's not really a good explanation. In terms of contemporary psychology, so one of the people who whose text I've read on the sort of the subject. So I guess take us back another step. I take a lot of steps back when I'm talking about things. One of the, I want to say that Kimirido, when they were writing about sort of the mentality of ero manga, and what the kind of guiding principle was that anything goes as long as it's erotic. So because they understood that it is a fictional space, because there is a considerable degree of delineation between the real life and the fantastic, especially through a drawn medium, that these expressions that would be taboo otherwise could be transgressed in a safe manner because of the nature of the medium. So as an example, I'm not as familiar with writing on paternal incest, but for something like siscon, as an example, people who have written about it have been like, I don't have a sister. And I think if I had a sister, I would want to kill her, as sibling rivalry kind of stuff, not literally, right? If I had a sibling, I would be a homicidal maniac. It's just like, siblings be doing what siblings do. It's more so that it's these sort of visual and cultural signifiers of what those relationships represent. You kind of hinted at it earlier, where the erotic manifestation of the big sister or the little sister, I mean, those are two different categories, because that's where this delineation is kind of necessary, because the person who's into siscon that likes the older sister versus the person who's into siscon that likes the younger sister are going for two different things.
Right.
They're related,
Yeah.
but they're different.
They're different. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's less that there is an explicit, again, there's less an explicit explanation that the Japanese are like uniquely incestuous. It's more so that because of the diversity and the nature of the ero manga and ero anime production and industry, that there's more space given to the fantasy and erotic fantasy that allows for the more explicit exploration of these taboo subjects and relationships that simply don't manifest in like North American or Anglo pornography. Because in Anglo pornography, normally what you'll end up having is, instead of, as you sort of alluded to again earlier, was it's not the sister, it's stepsister, it's stepmom. So they're related. You get the little bit of the taboo kind of adding to the excitement and the eroticism, but you don't have the explicit, we're blood relatives. Whereas you do.
Well, I think there's
in Japan.
I will try and speak on the appeal of sibling stuff. It's not my thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Okay, but
this is a safe space.
This is
We're not judging
literally
you.
This is literally just my speculation. And I think that the appeal is literally, this woman has moved into my house and is now like, we are now sharing a fairly close relationship, and we're not related.
From what I've read, it's very much like an ease of access thing, right? Like
like a proximity sort of thing.
Yeah, like with the sisters, it's like, this is a woman that is already in your life. You already have a rapport with. You're not having to build a relationship with them. It's just your relationship is now entered into a sexual one, as opposed to just being siblings kind of thing.
Yes.
I imagine
they're around your same age, so it's convenient, yada, 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 yada.
And I imagine step siblings is like very much similar to that. It's just removing that element of like familial and just purely focusing on ease of access kind of thing. Like, this person's already in my house. We're already kind of building a rapport.
And again, I guess with hentai, it ties into these conventions or these expressions. So the big sister represents a female presence that's been part of your life. Might be the first time, like a sister or a mom might be the first time that someone had seen a naked woman or a naked boy, if we're going the other way. And so there's the element of taboo, but there's also the element of familiarity, of someone who will be compassionate and who will kind of guide you through this experience. And that some people find particularly, erotically fulfilling when they're engaging with it through, anime or manga. Or the other way, where it's, like the younger sister, it's very often juxtaposed, where if you have a big sister and little sister in like the same kind of scenario, then it's the big sister is the woman who's experienced. She is the experience, whereas the younger sister is the inexperienced, is the virginal, innocence, and you start rolling into like the Rorikon kind of elements in that capacity. But again, and this is kind of, I guess, to take a step back, like I don't know, I really don't want to talk too much about Rorikon for obvious reasons, but for some reason, I just find that because hentai is not really discussed a lot in general. Obviously the Rorikon stuff, it comes up with like shipping and anti-shipping,
whole other debate.
Yeah. But like, it kind of like hentai in general kind of skirts around the whole thing, other than people who watch it are kind of like, gee, there's a lot of incest. Geez, there's a lot of rape. What's going on there? It just kind of gets ignored or just not discussed. I mean, you could like get into like Saito. So Saito, as Tamaki Saito, who wrote The Beautiful Fighting Girl, for perhaps your audience who may or may not have read that work.
I think a fair number of people who listen to this are familiar with it.
So
at least if they're active in our Discord,
familiar, whether they read it or not is another question.
Yeah,
whether they read it or not, that's another matter.
One of the interesting things that Saito talks about is that his definition of the otaku is boils down to someone who finds drawings or cartoons erotic. That's his delineation between an otaku and a maniac. A maniac is obsessive, will collect everything, will consume, effectively kind of like, he didn't talk about database consumption, but kind of will consume in that capacity. But there's always a kind of a border where they will never kind of get past a certain point. Whereas the otaku is able to eroticize the characters that they're consuming. And so he, again, doesn't really talk too much about like eromanga and eromane. He's talking more about a lot of more mainstream expressions or mainstream properties.
Like waifuism and stuff like that.
Yeah. But it's really interesting because he's like, this is why there's not, again, he was writing, it's like 2001, I think it was published. So it's a bit dated at this point, but he was writing in a point where he was like, this is the difference between, a North America, like someone who's outside of Japan, who's not an otaku, but who's like into anime and stuff, is that people don't watch Disney and find it erotic. And then you're like, well, yeah, but like the Tijuana Bibles have existed since the 1930s. Like, what are you talking about? Of course, people have found, have made, pornography, even if it was satirical, of these properties. So I think it's kind of it's an interesting way to approach like what makes someone an otaku, except that if by that capacity, the existence of Rule 34, it's like everyone's an otaku. Like everything will have some kind of pornographic reflection. And so when you read about people who are opposed to hentai or opposed to pornography, I guess like a narrow one on hentai, there are a couple of articles that have been written of people who are like very, very critical, want to ban it, or at least want to more heavily limit access to it, which I mean, again, frankly, it's pretty limited in terms of legal means of accessing it. They look at it and they basically see hentai as a gateway to get young people, because it's cartoons, and like the idea that in 2023 people write something about hentai or like cartoons being for kids, still predominantly for children, it's kind of like this isn't like 1996, right? So they kind of see it as a Trojan horse to corrupt the youth into like actual pornography use. And one of the things they point to is like, well, look at all this stuff where they've got like characters from My Little Pony, and they make like pornography of that. And how can you tell me that's not for children? And they're not trying to lure kids in with this. And you're like, but they're not though. Those are adults making that, eroticizing that content for other adults. That's right. For their own consumption or for consumption with other people of their community.
Well, I think it might just be hard for people to wrap their minds around that.
And so it's definitely an age thing, and definitely, if you're in the culture, so to speak, it makes complete sense, and that gets back to things like semiotic encoding and understanding the culture and how things are produced. So from the outside, I can certainly understand and appreciate that perspective, but it's kind of like if you're interrogating it, you really need to interrogate it and not just make blind assumptions, because that's how you wind up with really restrictive like laws and unnecessary censorship.
Right. I mean, Gail and I were just talking about obscenity laws last night, and how those are, I mean, even just going beyond like hentai, obscenity laws are just complete bullshit. Like at least in the United States, the origin of obscenity laws was to restrict access to information regarding abortion and contraceptives.
Yeah, right. And then,
and it's still people are still trying to push for its uses, because the Comstock Act of 1873 is still on the goddamn books.
In Japan, where this content is produced, the way that because so. In the, again, I got to take a journey back with me in history. So the early cinema.
Oh God.
So
part one, early cinema.
In the immediate post-war period, Japan gets a new constitution, and one of the things that Americans and a lot of Japanese want to do is to not have censorship, because the imperial state has relied heavily on censorship, and so freedom of expression, freedom of speech is enshrined in Japanese law, except for articles relating to, again, obscenity. So the reason that hentai and ero manga is censored is because up to a certain point it was illegal to depict genitalia, and it was illegal to depict genitalia even in anatomy texts up until, I believe, sometime in the 1980s. They still, when they were bringing over like translations of like American or European texts, they had to censor genitalia because it was illegal to have genitalia in a published text or published work. And so this is kind of when ero manga and ero anime is produced, it's heavily censored. And one of the really interesting things about it, I find, is that despite the fact that it's heavily censored, and then there's kind of censorship waxes and wanes, and as
there are different kinds of censorship as well. If you look at any sort of doujinshi publication these days, where it can vary between pixelation, whiting something out, or literally just here's a single black bar.
Yeah. So so as an example, when the first case of effectively an ero manga mangaka and publisher that was tried and successfully convicted in Japan is called the Honey Room trial. And this is because the censoring that they use in the manga panels was too sheer, effectively. So it was transparent, so you could basically see everything, and it was just a little shaded a little bit. And it was just, things like in terms of like anatomy, it's always sort of like the top of the vulva or the clitoris and the glands on the penis. Those are the two things that get censored. Everything else is pretty much you're good to go. Again, depending on the area you're talking about. But so in this case, it was determined that this text was not censored sufficiently. Now, again, they only got a fine. It's like they got imprisoned or anything. But it kind of, so that was kind of like that era. I think this was like circa 2008 was when, I don't have to guess. I literally have this information available, like right in front of me. It was 2004. It was the manga anthology was called Mishitsu, or Honey Room. And yes, they were prosecuted and fined for that. But the history of ero manga and ero anime is sort of the history of censorship. And Rido, as an example, instead of finding censorship as a barrier to creativity, finds it as a font. So it's a place of inspiration, and how you work around the censoring is the reason that hentai is the way that it is today. So we had already talked about things like tentacles,
right?
But again, you sort of alluded before, there's things like originally, especially when there was a little more humor and gags incorporated into the really early stuff, like going into like you'd have like anthropomorphize it. So the genitals would be something else. It would be, even like recently, I can think of an example. So are you familiar at all with the series? Bear with me here. I think it's a Mitsuru no K, or K-Land.
No.
Okay, so it was a series that was released. Bear with me for a moment. Again, I have this information in front of me. So Oideyo Mitsuru K-Land, or K-Land. It was released in 2017, and the basic premise of it is that it's actually one of the examples of all the sex is consensual, like through the entire thing. The basic plot is that K-Land is this theme park for adults that's erotic, and everyone's just having sex and engaging in sex acts. So there's a sequence where, as an example, they're walking around with like chocolate penises, and that's like a dessert. And so there's a character who's shown close up, of course, a female character like licking it and like putting it in her mouth and stuff. And it's basically a chocolate penis. And it's not censored because it's not a penis, it's a chocolate penis. But in the actual, erotic scenes, it said the penis is censored. You can't see it. It's pixelated. So the anthropomorphizing genitalia was an early way that they got around it. And then you'd have things like you'd have the blackout, where sometimes it was to the point where it was like literally just a void, and the genitals would come together, and then you go to like things like the bars, like the lightsaber where it's kind of like whited out or it's transparent. And again, some of these expressions were prevalent in manga, and then some of them were specifically present in anime. Again, because you have different media forms that need to reflect. They kind of require different ways of doing things. At least in terms of because of what you can I guess portray or represent in a manga panel is going to have restrictions and elements that aren't going to necessarily translate to anime.
That kind of makes me think of To Love Ru, because that's like a masterpiece of like skirting around censorship, where like it's very infamous for like it'll have, it might have like like white lines or something censoring like the nipple or whatever, like if they're lifting a skirt or something, but they usually will put something like somewhere where like there's a scene where like one of the girls is lifting her skirt and there's like a faucet that's like censoring, underneath her skirt. But then there's like a water droplet that's like reflecting what's actually being censored.
What's there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you got like flowers and stuff that are being used in place of the genitalia and stuff like that.
A more insane example is, do you know Parallel Paradise?
I'm not familiar with
it. It's an isekai manga from the creator of Elfen Lied.
Nice.
So it's insane, and without like divulging the entire plot, because I guess it'd take too long to explain, but it's basically about a guy who gets sent to a world where he is the only guy in that world. Okay. And in the world, because there are no men, all the girls are genetically conditioned to become immediately aroused upon the slightest contact with him.
Yeah.
And if they don't have sex by the time they turn 20, they die.
Ah, yes.
So there are a lot of explicit sex scenes in the manga. And when I say explicit, I mean very explicit. How do they get around this? Well, because the girls are so turned on by this guy, they produce a lot of fluid. And that fluid acts as its own form of censorship.
That's right. So
which is hilarious.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? So like Rito says, like Rito's philosophy is effectively that he feels that the existence of censorship has instilled in mangaka and in he's writing about manga, so let's stick with manga. This ability, this necessity to be as creative as possible, and all the ways to get around this. And yeah, so it's not. So this is it's not against the law. It's not obscene to show seminal fluids or other fluids aren't obscene. It's just that those specific parts of the genitals. This is again like the origin of the internal shot of the X-ray of the cross section, where if you show there's nothing illegal about showing a uterus. And so how that develops is that it starts off by doing this internal scene where you see the inside, the mechanics of what's going on. And when you stop to think about that, if you were to see something like that in real life, it would be, I don't think it would be, and again, I can't, I don't yuck anyone's yum here, but I don't think it would have the same kind of ability to be eroticized the same capacity, because that's that kind of like you move from pornography to health class, if that makes sense. But in the anime expression, the manga expression, it becomes incredibly erotic. So one of the more recent developments of this expression is the uterus kiss, where the males, the penis will effectively kiss the edge of the uterus, and this is a sort of
well, that's how sex works, right?
Right.
Right?
But
what do you mean it's not?
Again, it's a way that the expression it simply wouldn't have happened if they would have been allowed to have just depict genitals straight up. Born of necessity to create something that is even more erotic and more extreme, as an example. And that's kind of that's sort of this really, I guess, for people who are outside looking in, this really bizarre. You have this incredibly graphically sexualized and erotic content showing the literal internal mechanisms of the sexual reproductive organs, but they still can't show a penis. Like they can't.
Yeah,
they
well,
can't.
that's sort of the great like contradiction of all of this,
right? And again, that's really interesting. But again, would most people be like, I mean, I guess there is the market for uncensored hentai is like a thing. It's its own. There's like companies like Hentai Pros as an example.
Yes,
it's all free, but if you sign up for this, you'll have like an exclusive access to this library, and you won't have to say revert. You won't have to go to forums to have people who have explicitly come up with explainers for what anime is featured and what hentai anime is featured and what banner ads, so you can then track it down yourself. Nevertheless, because especially with more recently produced hentai, you're not. The age of uncensored hentai has effectively come and gone, at least in terms of ero anime. And the reason for that is because of the nature of production and localization in North America and in Japan itself. So like the collapse of physical media and the collapse of companies or the shrinking of companies like Central Park Media. Not Central Park Media, that collapse obviously of like a Media Blasters.
Media Blasters, yeah.
Means so there's a pretty good article. I think it was published again in like 2014, and the fellow's name escapes me off the top of my head, but he kind of explained. He's Shabe's boss.
Shabes, what's your boss's name?
Savakis?
Yeah,
Jason
Savakis.
Jason Savakis.
He had an article published, I think, in 2014. I think at ANN.
Justin Savakis.
Justin Savakis.
Let's get that right.
Yeah. So explaining what effectively happened, why after a certain period, like uncensored hentai disappears, and the reason for that, I mentioned it when we were talking about localizing and like uncensored masters. Well, effectively, what happened was that the North American market dried up, and that was because. Physical media has collapsed effectively, and everything went to digital streaming, and went to streaming and digital releases. And so outside of obviously the niche market that's kind of built up around physical releases, but in terms of the industry as it was versus what happened to it, what ended up happening is that the bread and butter for distribution of physical hentai properties in North America were effectively mom and pop adult video stores. That was the primary means through which hentai was distributed. There was catalogs you could order directly from them, but for the most part, it was independent pornography retailers. The internet and streaming abilities and high-speed bandwidth destroyed that industry completely, even worse than Blockbuster. Maybe not worse than Blockbuster because they could always fall back on other things, but that market collapsed. Coupled with that was the Amazon will not carry pornography. They won't sell hentai.
Right.
So that option for distribution through a third party, through the platform of Amazon, also meant that the market, the ability to access this material is dried up. So that was one really important part, that the North American market for hentai physical media collapsed. Coupled with that was that the basis upon which you were able to get uncensored hentai, as I sort of mentioned before, the Japanese, the production companies in Japan would produce the thing uncensored, then they'd add the censorship, post-production. They would send the uncensored masters to North America. North America would release them. And that's where the bulk of the uncensored hentai comes from, those original uncensored masters. What ended up happening in Japan, though, from the Japanese consumer side, is that because of the internet and because of increased globalization and distribution networks, even though it was a bit more expensive, Japanese consumers could import, because it's not illegal to own or to import uncensored pornography. It's only illegal to produce it and to sell it in like stores.
Right.
So what ended up happening was that Japanese consumers, the consumer base for, again, physical media and hentai media specifically, would import the uncensored American or European versions of Japanese product and not buy the Japanese one. So that started cutting into the margins for Japanese producers, who just decided, well, the bulk of the funds they were making through selling uncensored masters of the licenses for these North America had dried up, and it was cutting into their profits at home. So we're not going to release uncensored masters anymore, and that's why there's no more uncensored hentai.
What's the timeline on that?
I think it was around sort of like the mid-aughts. You kind of start seeing uncensored stuff. I guess it would have really been when like Kitty Media had I guess using Kitty Media as the test. I think Media Blaster started running into their trouble around 2012. Is when they started having like significant layoffs, and they ran into their initial financial troubles.
They lost a lot of titles around that time too, I believe.
So you're probably looking at like the kind of the peak period for uncensored hentai was in that like 2000s to 2010s, 2012 era. Is sort of when you look at the properties that are produced at that point, that's when you're going to get the uncensored stuff. And then sort of kind of post that, it becomes less and less common, to the point now where almost all the releases you get, and almost all the releases are effectively still censored. Now, has that hampered people consuming it? Absolutely not.
No, absolutely not.
Not at all. And again, a property like K-Land, as I mentioned, in terms of the, I guess, quality of animation, the nature, like how hardcore it is, the kind of sequences that are being depicted. When you compare something like that to, say, something like Bible Black, is significantly more, I would say, extreme or hardcore. And I mean, Bible Black sold itself on being kind of hardcore, but when you compare the degree of now I'm not an animation scholar, and I'm sure that there are people listening who are. They kind of be like, you don't know what you're talking about, you idiot, you absolute buffoon.
Leave a comment in the description or come on our podcast. We would love to talk with you.
That's right. There's a distinction between something produced in 2017 versus something produced in 2007, let's say. Even though the one in 2007 might be uncensored, the one in 2017, it definitely has much more of a hardcore nature or eroticism, I would say, to it. Now, that might just be personal taste thing, too, of course. That might be incredibly subjective. But yeah.
So what you're saying is the eroticism is not in what you see, but is what you don't see.
Well, if nothing else, I think at that point, I've talked about the glimpse before. I think at that point, because because your mind, because the person who's consuming it is already familiar with how to decode what they're seeing in front of them, the fact that the penis has or the parts of the vulva are blurred out has absolutely no impact whatsoever on the ability for it to be erotic. So it's not. I wouldn't kind of classify it in the same way that I would say something like a glimpse, the flash of a nipple, as an example, of that, using I guess it's more seeing catching the base of the idea of the glimpse is that you catch something very briefly, and it's that momentary kind of something you shouldn't have been able to have seen, but you kind of caught it, is exciting. Versus just a completely exposed breast. It's kind of well, there it is. I don't think that has too much to do with the current appeal or the people's ability to get around the pixelation. Mm-hmm. I think it's more that they're able to see past the pixelation, if that makes sense. The pixelation almost isn't there. It's accepted as a part of the media form itself.
Right.
The censorship is not a barrier to eroticism.
It is kind of part and parcel of it.
So what's kind of the marketing structure for like hentai? Obviously they're OVAs, so they're being funded basically just through being purchased. But are you familiar with like how they're chosen to be animated? Like, it doesn't necessarily seem like there's the same kind of structure as far as like, you know, with Shonen Jump or something. Like the publisher of Shonen Jump is the one that kind of funds the adaptation for like a Demon Slayer or something with UFO Table. And it's kind of acting as promotional material for the manga for that publisher. It doesn't necessarily seem like there's that kind of structure in place for like hentai, because obviously some animated hentai is just like doujinshi. I don't, not necessarily like the animation is doujin, but like the, you know, obviously the
source material.
Yes.
So again, because I guess my specific focus is on a specific era and primarily focused in North America. A lot of what I have to, it's again, either speculation or just sort of things that I've probably come across. So it isn't my precise area of expertise. Like obviously the sources for ero anime are multiple, you know, you've got doujinshi, you have officially licensed ero manga, you've got eroge, you have, you know, visual novels, and adaptations of that material into anime. Again, as far as I know, at least currently, I'm not as familiar with any kind of streaming Japanese platforms in terms of what is available, like how much. I know in North America, hentai now is consumed almost exclusively outside of, you know, the very limited physical releases through streaming.
Right.
I'm not sure how it works in Japan. I'm not familiar with the Japanese platforms, but I know that the one of the significant income streams in Japan are people who are buying physical releases of hentai as effectively not a prestige product, but like a specialty product. And that's the main market for that. But I'm not entirely sure how. Like, I know how production committees work, for, as you sort of alluded to before. I'm not as familiar with how it actually works in from a Japanese production standpoint as to like which property gets selected and then which to get produced. I think we're largely past the point where it's like independent productions that are doing it.
Right.
And it's like, you know, it's the major production companies that are like with major hentai production companies that are producing this stuff, but I'm not actually sure what the model is in that capacity, because it's, I guess, a bit beyond outside of my scope in terms of the stuff that I'm kind of interested in, which is like the North American side.
Sure.
And unfortunately, at least right now, at least available in English, the only sort of, as I said, like academic public facing texts are explicitly on manga. So there's nothing.
Right.
Nothing. I don't read Japanese. Surprise. Nothing.
Well, I mean, there's probably some stuff on eroge.
Oh, 100% there is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But in terms of ero anime, at least nothing's been translated into English as far as I know. I've found. So.
It is a shame that like there is such a stigma on talking about, you know, ero manga or ero anime, stuff like that, where there's just like that barrier.
Well, talking about it in the capacity that we're talking, because I think there are spaces that that exist online to like discuss this stuff, but it's usually, for want of a better term, degenerate discussions.
Well,
they're conversations that are taking place beneath on pirate sites, beneath the stream.
Yes.
Yeah.
The true intellectual discourse.
That's right.
Certain discords and subreddits maybe as well. But but it's not, but you know, there are people, I don't think people talk about or I mean, it's already a struggle in a lot of ways for, just your average consumer of anime to talk about or think about anime in a more analytical capacity. I think there is still like a stigma to that, especially with certain kinds of just regular anime, not even getting into hentai.
Yeah, like you see that with
100%.
like isekai, right? Because like
literally we had check out our isekai episode.
plug all of our stuff.
And then that just becomes magnified when talking about hentai.
Well, this is kind of one of the interesting things that is happening is there is to some extent a visible trend of mainstreaming more overtly erotic content, or at least attempts are being made. So and this is like in Japan as well.
Right.
So the best example, easiest example is interspecies reviewers. And
yes,
because it was still a censored version of it, but it was still initially broadcast on, major TV networks, and they did cancel it pretty quick.
Some canceled it, some kept it. That was a whole it kind of got overshadowed by the whole My Anime List thing, but
yeah,
there was a whole thing with like juggling, because I think Crunchyroll at one point had it, maybe it was Funimation, and then they dropped it, and then it got picked up by someone else.
Yes.
It was just
so effectively
all over the place.
So originally it was uncensored on the digital station ATX, and then the censored version was broadcast on Tokyo MX, BS11, KBS, and Sun. It started airing in January of 2022, and by February, Tokyo MX and Sun had canceled future broadcasts. And then the series was originally licensed to stream by Funimation. They stopped after 3 episodes, and Amazon Prime also removed it from its library from 2020. With that said, it was kind of testing the waters, right? So if you look at another series that kind of isn't quite as overt, because Ishiko Reviewers was really, as close as overt softcore hentai was getting. But
shows like this have like existed in some capacity. Well, prior to that, usually they are a bit shorter. They tend to run in like maybe the 5 to 15 minute range.
Yeah.
Like there's like a firefighter one. I'm trying to remember what the hell it's called. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know what the fuck I type in. Softcore? How the fuck? How do I find this on AniList?
Someone order a firefighter?
Someone order a firefighter?
I heard there's a burning I need to put out with my hose.
Okay, so yeah, stuff like Overflow or what else? Some of these are directed like specifically towards women as well, which is interesting.
Of course.
Soryo to Majiwaru Shikiyoku no Yoro ni. What the fuck is the English name? There is none. All right, why not? But stuff like that is it's stuff that could be coming out around that time and prior as well.
No, Overflow, I think I'm familiar with. But because they
Fire in his fingertips is the one I was thinking of.
Because Overflow I'm familiar with, but they also did they have like the uncensored version. They said the censored version too, right? And then they have the uncensored version that you could
there are 2 versions
after. Another example that would be it was one of those problematic isekai. The title's escaping me right off the top of my head.
Was it Redo of Healer?
Yeah, Redo of Healer. Again,
Healer.
Featured significantly kind of more overt arrow sequences.
Just literally everything but the genitalia.
Exactly, right? And so obviously it had always sort of been, there's examples you can kind of think of, but it is something where you've almost kind of got this mainstreaming of hentai expressions in TV anime, which I think is just a really interesting development. And I guess we'll kind of see where it goes. I'm not as familiar with the broadcast history of Redo of Healer. I'm not sure. But I don't remember hearing anything about it.
I don't think it was as much of a fiasco.
And again, that might be because it's interspersed. It's the focus of it isn't the sex. I guess you could argue it's that's just an incidental component of it. Whereas Ishiko Reviewers, it's literally the point of the show.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's all very interesting. And like I said, there's an absolute, in terms of fan spaces, there's an absolute demand for this kind of content. Like, as I said, I've done the hentai panels at Anime North 2 years now, last year and this year. I mean, first time after the reopened after the pandemic, and we're always at capacity. And this year we did, I think, quite well, to the point where, so we had, it was the way the scheduling worked was that we had what's called the Hentai Comprehensive Panel, where we just talked about, general things like the history, expressions, tags, that kind of stuff. And then directly afterward, we had what was called Dark Side of Hentai, where we were looking at kind of more extreme versions of different tags. So we looked at things like, the tentacle rape, incest, neterare or NTR. And then you'd go into other things like, like inflation and, pregnancy, and then getting into like eroguro and that kind of stuff. Right.
Right.
But because with Anime North, the way the scheduling worked is that they do try to stagger things. But in this case, it was kind of back to back. So we had people leaving this panel when we mentioned that it was next, to leave the panel to line up so they could get back in for the second part. So, the content or the attendance is always, it's really popular. And again, this is kind of like this thing, like no one talks about it, but everyone wants to, no one talks about it, but everyone wants to.
Yeah. That's it. Well, it's good. I mean, it's good to hear that like events like that are being like packed.
Oh yeah. And again, like, and the con runners, like we were even approached by a guy running, doing, I can't remember which other convention it was, like in little break between. And it was like, if we're looking for the same kind of, after dark adult 18 plus content, and, we'd be willing to, like fast track your application if you wanted to bring this to our convention. And I'm like, unfortunately, I can't because of my specific situation. I'm married, I have kids. Mm-hmm. It's hard for me to travel and that kind of stuff. So,
right. And they were probably like, what the fuck? You're married and have kids?
What a freak.
What are you doing talking about porn?
What a maniac. What a maniac.
And again, that's that kind of that erotic barrier, right? But there's absolutely an appetite for it. And I know that Anime North wants to also expand its 18 plus content even beyond just hentai, looking at other stuff as well. So there's absolutely a demand for it. And again, the existence of pirate sites and how popular it is, and
it's growing right alongside anime.
Yeah. It's always been, right. It's always been a part of it.
A 1-to-1 kind of thing.
Yeah, like people, like, again, when you talk about the early history of ero manga, people talking about, Tezuka was, Osamu Tezuka was, the godfather of manga, but he also influenced artists like what's the fella's name? I can never. I always want to say Hiroki Azuma, but it's not.
Hideo Azuma.
Yeah, Hideo Azuma. And he's, considered one of, like, if Azuma's not Azuma, Tezuka's the godfather of manga, he's the godfather of ero manga, effectively.
Yeah.
And just, the eroticization of, and I mean, it's Tezuka himself, obviously with works like, let's say Ayako. I have it written here somewhere.
And then I believe Hideo Azuma then went on to do like designs for like Daikon and shit. So, it's all, it all kind of feeds back into,
it's always been there, just boiling underneath the surface.
No pun intended. It is the anime, manga, and hentai spheres are incestuous.
Yes. And again, why I think it's a worthwhile study, a worthwhile subject to study and to take seriously. Even if a lot of other people don't, they still appreciate they'd still appreciate the people who do. Like, again, like in that the Anime North Discord, where it was like, I do take it seriously, actually, and this is what we talk about. The person wasn't like, what a loser. They were like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I'll go and see that. Maybe I'll go to the panel. And it's like, oh, that's all you could really ask for.
Yeah, it's a shame that stigmatization exists like so heavily. Where like it was a big thing for a while, where people were just like dismissive of like Fate Stay Night because like, oh, it's just like a porn game adaptation.
Porn game. Oh, it's an eroge. Oh, so it's an erotic game. It's like maybe it's like 10 minutes, and the game itself is like 30 hours.
And it's like it's just as like interesting to kind of look into the history of like, certain tags or like this techniques for censorship and shit, like how that's all kind of evolved as it is, anything else. Like, you look at isekai, how people are very dismissive of that. And it's equally interesting just to go and look at like the lineages of like the different kinds of, how they kind of interact with the world, how they are transported, like all those different kind of lineages to kind of look at there. Just people are just so just kind of dismissive of these kind of things where they're like, oh, well, isekai is all the same. It's all just, power fantasy kind of self-insert bullshit, or like hentai is all just tentacle porn and shit like that. Like, it's just, the conversation is not in like good faith, right? Like, it's more just, right now I think the focus on like ecchi or pornographic kind of content like anime is more focused on like, the lens of which it's being kind of perceived, like it's very much like a male lens. It's problematic as far as like how it represents females, stuff like that. And it's like that those conversations are like valuable in the space, but at the same time they're kind of dismissive of like the history of like, well, why did these things kind of evolve the way they did, and like what interest there could be in like kind of observing that and like kind of talking about that and discussing that and how that could translate to change in the future, I guess.
Yeah, and that's again that's where someone like Galbraith is really interesting, because people who write about this stuff, and Rito as well as Nagayama, when people, so I guess again I'm just stepping back again, when you look at some of the articles and things that are written about hentai, written about ero anime, there's always this, it's incredibly misogynistic. And that's all it can ever be. But this has to do with, again, in media theory, something called the subject position. So who is the subject and how are you viewing it?
Right.
So the automatic default assumption with something like the tentacle rape is that the presumed male viewer is taking on the position of the tentacle monster and the person who's ravaging the female character. And it's never thought for a second that perhaps the person isn't, empathizing or seeing in themselves this ravenous monster, but the female character to begin with. And that's the kind of thing that's the kind of expression that something like ero anime can offer. It can be an interrogation of gender roles and the role of the individual in terms of what they find erotic in erotic fantasy. Is that the person they're empathizing with isn't the monster, it's the woman. And that can create this, it can problematize this assumed, gender binary, or the assumed gaze that's operating, that you have other alternatives that are available, where the subject position is of the female character and not the effectively disembodied, almost non-existent protagonist kun. There's the memes about the protagonists, you never see their face, and they're literally just empty spaces to have the male viewer insert themselves. But that also means that there's no kind of emotional connection that's being able to be made with that character, because they don't exist. But the female characters do exist, and there's definitely, and again, a lot of the literature, a lot of writing to that effect, that it's the person is not empathizing. Like, how could you say this isn't misogynistic? And it's, well, they're not empathizing with the monster. They're empathizing with the female character, because it's a way for them to explore a gender identity in especially, very highly patriarchal social structures and cultures, that it's the female character that the person sees themselves as, and not the monster.
Well, when you think about it makes sense, because like in a lot of those, the tentacles are very mechanical, right? Like, not necessarily literally, but like they're just performing a function. There's not a like sense of pleasure kind of tied to the tentacles themselves. You're experiencing it from the lens of the woman who's like experiencing it herself. Like, that's the kind of lens you're being presented with. It's not, you're the tentacles.
and that's exactly right. And so in a lot of cases, when you look at a lot of the earlier, if we're talking about tentacles, a lot of the earlier tentacle expressions, there is more of that aspect of the person who is attached at the other end of the tentacles is getting something out of it. Whereas as the media forms kind of, the expressions kind of progressed, you do have this tendency to be more mechanical, to be less less about the person who's attached to the tentacles and more just about the tentacles being an avenue for, for eroticism for the again, almost always the female character. Now, it's not always the case, but there is this shift where they are almost as the tentacles are almost as disembodied as the protagonist Kun.
Yeah.
And again, that just there's so much that you can look if you stop and you apply a critical lens. There's a lot more going on with pornography, and again, in the specific case with hentai, than simply something that's a masturbatory aid. And not that there's anything wrong with, because I'm going to be honest, that's still the primary mechanism, is still the raison d'etre of a lot of this stuff,
right?
Is as a masturbatory aid, but that isn't all it has to be. And when you get past that element of it, even incorporating that element into it, how is it that people are getting turned on by this stuff? How is it that this has become such a successful and effective means of erotic communication? That's where the really interesting part of this lies, that gets past this is just smut that's destroying society and creating these degenerates.
It's interesting because like a lot of the, I guess you'd call it, stimuli that kind of spur these kind of artistic directions of like tentacle kind of stuff, like they're very similar to the stimuli that was in the West. They've just kind of manifested themselves through a different cultural lens here in, era manga and hentai. Like tentacles, like that kind of hentai stuff, that kind of evolved more into almost like just BDSM, right? Like it's, instead of just being ropes, it's kind of just tentacles that are just kind of an extension of the sexual kind of pleasure organ or whatever.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That's again one of the reasons that Maeda found it incredibly expansive. It just presented greater opportunities to incorporate elements that made it more erotic. So again, tentacles are ready-made bondage equipment. It's ready-made. Is it the shibari? Is the
that's the term for Japanese rope play.
So it was effectively multifunctional shibari, whereas it could be both the bondage equipment, the restraints, as well as the element for penetration and for other kinds of play. And again, it's not something you might even stop to think about if you don't think about it, if it's not something you reflect on. And I mean, you can get into all the different kinds of tags and the kinds of expressions that they sort of engender. If you would want to talk about maybe Western expressions, so one of the things that is very prevalent, at least again, not in terms of any kind of official stuff, but certainly fan produced, and perhaps the equivalent is of course like anthro stuff, like a furry, so to speak. Is another way that a problematized eroticism has developed in terms of North American fan cultures, and obviously there are elements in anime and manga. Cat girls have been a thing for quite some time, but I mean in terms of like just general expression, anthro stuff in North America is, at least online, is not insignificant in terms of the kind of material that's being produced, and that would be the closest thing you have to North American doujinshi, or things like R34 and the R34 subreddit,
Rule 34, DeviantArt.
Yeah, there are a lot of
all of these different websites and communities essentially
that effectively function.
Newgrounds is another one.
Yeah, that effectively function as like a North American cognate to doujin circles and and even though they function a little bit differently because it's typically more less a circle. I mean, there were web rings, of course, but I mean, it's usually individual.
But a lot of it's very much more individual.
Yeah, individual producers, individual production, as opposed to group production of materials and stuff. Even if you had things overlapping, and again, furries and anthros face the same kind of stigmas that it's weird pornography for weirdos and degenerates.
It is interesting that, like, I guess you could say that the language of, erotic material in like Western circles is very different from like the Eastern kind of language. Like, obviously, ero manga, stuff like that, you have, tentacle porn, stuff like that. The West, do you get stuff like inflation?
I mean, you still get that in a lot of Japanese.
Well, there's definitely
words.
like crossover.
You absolutely do. And
you can literally look at Tezuka for like furry shit.
Yeah.
Boggy is an example that and I don't know, I think more people should probably cite in these sorts of discussions because holy hell. But then there was crossover even like in like early North American fandoms between anime and furry with Fred Patton, stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely like that cross exchange of information, but there's definitely like a lineage you can kind of trace within these circles of like where one kind of developed more of this thing than the other, and then like it kind of crossed over into another kind of circle.
They also do differentiate themselves, of course. Yeah.
I guess the significance of I don't know, the early internet culture, but like late 90s, early 2000 internet culture, in terms of at least in terms of again, it's not something I've looked at with great detail, but it definitely something I will be, that the expansion and growth of the furry kind of corresponds to the growth and dissemination of hentai in the same kind of online spaces. Like I guess what I'm thinking of is something like webcomics, like the Keen Spot era of webcomics, when anyone and everyone was producing them. You have a lot of people making in-jokes about hentai. There is, for example, there's a web cartoonist I've been following since like they're still doing it. They've been doing it for over 20 years now. It's Randy Mulholland. He writes a comic called Something Positive. At some point, I can't remember exactly what year it was, he came up with like a merchandise he was selling. And one of them was I'm hentai. And it's a little kid that's dressed up in like a tentacle outfit that has like panties pinned to it. But it's kind of, so it's like, I'm hentai. And the fact that it had kind of disseminated kind of beyond anime circles, or perhaps, everyone people who were producing webcomics were obviously heavily influenced, who were almost certainly largely anime fans or manga fans themselves. But I kind of feel like there is this crossover because it was gestating and promulgating in the same spaces at the same time, that there are these really interesting parallels between the dissemination of hentai and the growth of places like X hentai, E hentai, and places like Fur Affinity, and the sort of like the anthropomorphic.
What's the one with the numbers in the name? E653 something along those fucking lines.
They're producing materials and disseminating materials of a similar nature at the same time. And there's a lot of crossover in those expressions. And it just so happened that in North America, it was the furry stuff, or YIF as it's called. Well, got to use a technical term here.
Technical terms.
Yeah.
So let's use the language of their people.
Mm-hmm. And the idea that like in anime, current anime fandom discourse, there is still like this, like you just, I watch hentai and tentacle stuff, and that's fine, but you're a degenerate furry, and it's a joke and it's a meme, but there's still kind of like this.
I mean, there is conflict between these two communities online.
Absolutely. And I mean, I guess there doesn't have to be. We can
all get along.
We can all get along and have our particular proclivities in terms of the erotic content that's being produced and consumed.
Weird shit people are into.
That's right.
Fine.
But that's the thing. Like, everyone's into it.
Yeah.
Everyone's fucked at some point.
Mm-hmm. As long as it's erotic, anything goes.
As long as presuming it's drawn.
Yes, this is all in the case of animation and drawn material.
Do not take this out of context to say that we're saying something else.
Yeah,
Jesus Christ.
This is again Nagayama and Rito speaking in historically contextualized context of ero manga and ero anime and eroge and not real life, because again, when you read the critical literature, the literature that's doesn't like hentai, that's beyond like, the orientalizing stuff that was coming out in like the 90s. It's basically just trying as hard as it can to equate hentai and pornography. And while there obviously is overlap, and to the point where one of the marketing aspects of even in Japan, but in North America as well, was having like adult film stars providing the voice work for dubs. Even though there's that, the industry for hentai is not built on the same kind of exploitation and potential for exploitation that live action, let's call it pornography, is.
Yeah.
So as much as as degrading and as misogynistic as the texts and the animation can be, and let's not kid ourselves, obviously it can be, from the production side, the exploitation is just the exploitation that is capitalism, because capitalist production, as opposed to capitalist production plus human misery. Or at least sexual exploitation that's rife
of actual people. Yeah. Which not necessarily always bad, but that industry is certainly rife with its own problems.
Yeah, but it's sort of like hentai is not beholden to that kind of concern with direct human exploitation that pornography is. And so while it is obviously pornography and pornographic, there are different, if you're looking at it from an ethical lens or even a legal lens, there are different productive forces at work and conditions at work that make one effectively significantly less problematic than the other. But you still then have people who are anti-pornography looking at something like hentai and being like, well, because we know that pornography is exploitative and misogynistic and leads to suffering and all kinds of other things, then this animated form also obviously does the same thing. And I think there's actually really interesting theoretical reasons as to why that's the case, and not why someone could look at like a hentai and be like, that's as bad or worse than actual pornography, even though it's drawn. There are again, there's some interesting theory as to why people are able to equate them now versus 20, 30, maybe 40 years ago, where the delineation would have been much more rigid.
I guess playing devil's advocate, it's not necessarily that it's like exploitative, so it's not like wrong in a moralistic sense in that regard. But I guess like the idea is like it blurs the lines of like what is appropriate and what is not, in a way that maybe like the real porn, quote unquote real porn industry doesn't necessarily have. So like if it's like a My Little Pony adult animation or something, like that's obviously made by adults for adults, but there is still that kind of blending of like, these are characters that are made from a children's cartoon. It is like, it is something to be enjoyed by the family, but it is something that is targeted with children in mind. And they are able to kind of look these things up through the ease of access of information. Like that's the sort of thing that blends, like kind of blurs that line, I guess, more so than like if they look up actual pornography, because it's like more, I guess, quote unquote, insidious is the idea, I guess, is the way to put it.
Yeah, and 100%, absolutely. I think that that's almost indisputable at this point. I guess that fundamentally the issue of, in that case, capacity then is going to be something like ease of access, as opposed to the fact that the content exists, because the content has always existed. So I mentioned way back the idea of a Tijuana Bible, And I guess for people who aren't familiar with, again, listeners who might not be familiar with that term, a Tijuana Bible was effectively a pornographic comic book that was made based on licensed, characters in like the 1920s and 1930s. So like Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Popeye, Olive Oil, kind of classic cartoon characters that would be put into pornographic situations, like what would basically be R34 now, except in a printed and distributed format.
Right.
Again, always unofficial, but I guess from like the medium that pattern of production and consumption has always existed.
Yeah, and even
I guess people
even like the real space, right? Because like you had porn parodies of like Beauty and the Beast as far back as like the 80s or 70s. Like,
oh yeah,
like it's not like this was like a new thing, even within like
not at all
the adult spaces.
Yeah, and it's just that it's ease of access and the way that internet searches work. And again, so to that I would say, again, as a parent, that is kind of on you. You can to some extent curate your children's access to content. It might take a little bit of effort. And again, as children age and they become more
clever,
familiar with
technology,
familiar with technology, and become more media savvy, so to speak. That obviously is going to be a more significant concern. But again, there are controls and things that you can do to mitigate that exposure. But I do think that it is certainly a significant concern, and a lot of the literature on the topic very often comes down to, because there's no smoking gun, there's no study that has conclusively shown that there's the consumption of pornography leads to things like increase in sexual assaults, increase in that. Right. It always falls back to the potential for harm. This kind of like it could cause harm because it could do things like normalize certain expressions or normalize certain beliefs or normalize. And that again falls back on, specific hegemonic media theories and the way that people think or the way that people believe media works versus perhaps the way that it might work in a different capacity. And one of the things that's kind of encouraging is that media studies and media theory is something that is now becoming part of the I for example, I'm in Toronto and Ontario in Canada, and I have my daughter was just finished grade 2, going to grade 3. They have media studies, like they do study media, and that's not really something that I had when I was going to school, when I was in dinosaur ages, but. So there's at very least, I guess, from the perspective of the state and public school curricula, an understanding that children need to have some kind of understanding of media and how it affects them, and because we're hyper saturated in like hyper media effectively. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to dismiss the concern of the potential for harm that certainly can and does exist, especially in, like I said, I can understand why someone who's like an anti-pornography crusader would look at something like, Rule 34 and like MLP erotic materials that fans produce and be like, this is a pipeline to try to get. It's kind of like, well, it's not, but I can understand why you would think that. And I can understand the potential for a kid finding that and then being like, what do they do in a Twilight Sparkle?
Yeah.
Well, we've been going for probably close to like 3 hours now, looking at my recording. So, I think it's probably a good time to sign off then.
Yeah, it works for me.
Do
you have any? Anyone have any closing remarks?
If I could just offer one suggestion,
go ahead.
One piece of advice, as I said, I think that if there's no harm, and you're good, have the great possibility and potential for increasing your development and appreciation for a medium that you're going to spend a great deal of your life consuming, that you owe it to yourself. I think you have the opportunity to have perhaps a better experience, a more interesting experience, if you engage with the media critically and you kind of take the media form seriously. It doesn't mean you can't have fun with it, because certainly you can, but stay curious, I guess would be if I could offer one piece of advice is, be curious and have an inquiring mind about the media you consume, even the erotic and the pornographic, because if you do, there might be something there that's a lot more interesting than you perhaps thought at first blush.
No, yeah, that's beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Richard, thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
As always.
Thanks for having me on. Greatly appreciated, gents.
Yeah.
I can't.
As always, I don't know. You can listen to us on.
Oh, we have
Spotify
an outro now. We're not just gonna cut off.
I have. Well, I don't know. Are people aware that we're on Apple? I think we're on any podcast platform.
We're on every single one of them. I upload to RSS.
Yeah,
it just uploads everywhere.
Whatever the hell you use, we're on.
If you use Deezer, we're on that. You use iHeartRadio, we're on that. Pandora. There you go. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts.
Is Pandora still around?
Podcast Index, Listen Notes, Samsung Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify, Firefox, Castbox, Pocket Cast, Podnotes, Widget, Bullhorn, Podbeam, Podcast Guru, Microsoft Bingbot, Dotbot, Deezer Podcast, Overcast Feed Parser, Safari, Stitcher, Chromecast device, Googlebot, Overcast, Downcast, Antenna Pod.
So many of these.
And YouTube.
We're literally on all these things. I don't know what half of this shit is. I've never even heard of what's a Podbean. Bingbot, there's at least 2 people listening on Bingbot. Hi. Googlebot. Fuck, I don't know what the fuck half this shit is. But we're on it. Find us there.
Goodbye.